That was Deidre Hutton opening today's program with her beautiful singing. Thank you so much. Welcome to our program honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I am Laura Lampkin, a junior from Chicago, majoring in human services. As I look around the room this afternoon, I can see that none of you were forced to be here. And please know, we students of Upper Iowa University value your presence. It is evident that you realize the importance of this event and that you want to be a part of a celebration for one of the milestones in American history, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, a celebration of the emancipation. When I think of November 4th, 2008, the inauguration of President Barack Obama, our first Black president, a wonderfully historic day in this nation, I think of many other milestones in American history, like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Day, and many other great men and women who came before Barack Obama. Historic moments, great people, bridges, ingredients to make a great nation the greatest nation. I can't help but think of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. because he knew a little bit about the significance of the power of the vote to bring about change. It was Dr. King who reminded America that change does not roll in on the wheels of certainty, but comes through continuous struggle. And so, we must straighten our backs and work for our freedom. A man can't ride your back unless your back is bent. In the face of those who urged blacks to wait for the freedoms they had sought for years, your rights, they said, will come in time. To which Dr. King said, a right delayed is a right denied. I thank Dr. King for his tireless work and for serving as a mentor to me as well as many in our country. Now, please welcome the President of Upper Iowa University, Dr. Alan G. Walker.
Thank you, Laura. Good afternoon, everyone. I proudly stand here today as president of one of the most diverse institutions of higher learning in the state of Iowa. And I want to welcome you to UIU's Dr. Martin Luther King Day program today. I'm deeply honored to have this opportunity to share remarks with you as we celebrate the birth, the life, the dream of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy continues to be studied by people of numerous backgrounds. He is known for being one of the greatest orators of the 20th century and is best known for helping to achieve civil equality for African Americans. However, his true goal was much larger than that. Dr. King hoped to achieve acceptance for all people, regardless of race or nationality. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s talent to direct and motivate masses of people, along with his brilliant mind, transmittable spirit, and his abiding faith, propelled him into leadership at a crucial moment in history. He became an international symbol of the American Civil Rights Movement. It is my personal belief as well that there are many good people in the world representing all races, in that we must feel the responsibility and take the necessary actions to continue Dr. King's mission in promoting love and understanding between all races and to help persons accomplish their goals and to strive for excellence. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. asserted, and I quote, "The ultimate tragedy is not the brutality of the bad people, but the silence of good people." Your attendance here today speaks volumes. It shows your support for Dr. King's words, dreams, and mission. It validates the importance of his life's work and sends a message of hope that it will live on. I now have the privilege of introducing today's guest speaker, Dr. Dwight Watson. Dr. Watson is currently the Dean of the College of Education at the University of Northern Iowa in Cedar Falls. Dr. Watson received his BA and MED in elementary education from the University of South Carolina in Columbia, South Carolina. He received his EED in curriculum and instruction with a concentration in reading and writing literacy from North Carolina State University of Raleigh, North Carolina. Dr. Watson taught elementary and middle grades for 10 years in Raleigh, North Carolina and Sumter, South Carolina. He taught on the university level for 7 years as an assistant and associate professor of education and the director of elementary programs at Campbell University in Buies Creek, North Carolina. Dr. Watson has also been a central office administrator for a large urban district and served as the language arts program director. As program director, he supervised the language arts, reading and writing curriculum and staff development for 64 elementary schools, as well as orchestrated programs for the Title I and Reading Recovery. Dr. Watson was the Associate Dean of Teacher Education Programs and chair of the Departments of Curriculum and Instruction and Foundations for Education at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. Previously, he was an associate professor of education at Hamline University. Dr. Watson's current research interests are curriculum integration, children's literature, and conflict resolution. He conducts numerous local, state, national, and international workshops on his research interests, as well as other areas of reading and writing literacy. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Dwight Watson.
Good afternoon. Okay, let's hear it again. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. All right, what a wonderful audience. Early this morning, I addressed a group of students who were honoring Dr. King by participating in the Day of Service. I launched the Day of Service with the following statement. Dr. King truly believed that a life worth living is one that's lived for others. As you embark on your Day of Service, I too want to embrace Dr. King's belief. As part of a community, you must participate in the well-being of that community, and there is no better way to affect community change than to serve. Embedded in Dr. King's life was the mantra, service before self. This may be far too noble a notion for the service you are undertaking this morning, but I do want you students to recognize that by getting a college education, you will be allowed access to opportunity. These opportunities will secure you privileges that others cannot access. If this world was based on equality, in which all of us have the same access and opportunity, then these service days may not be necessary. Dr. King also quoted that it's difficult to pick yourself up by your bootstraps when you have no boots. Dr. King, as you conduct your service work today, please do this work based on some sort of, please do not do this work based on some sort of missionary zeal to help the unfortunates, but on your own altruistic stances in which you recognize that to whom much is given, much is required. As you interact with many people throughout the day, you may encounter people who are different than you, be it race, gender, ethnicity, religious affiliation, affectional orientation, socioeconomic status, age, or ability. It may be important to follow these guidelines for courageous conversations as you interact with those who are different from you. So at the University of Northern Iowa on today, we had a service day, and all of the students were asked to participate in some sort of service outside of their classes. We didn't have class today because we are a state university and it's a federal holiday. And so they participated in services throughout the community. And as I opened today's service day this morning, we talked about some of these statements from Dr. Martin Luther King. And these statements are statements that I want you to try to embrace throughout the day and throughout your life. We also talked about the tenets of courageous conversations. When you are entering into a courageous conversation and you're speaking, you should always start by speaking your truth. You should accept and expect non-closure, because sometimes when you have a courageous conversation, closure is not the outcome. You should always focus on the local and immediate. What can you have? What do you have immediate control over? What can you focus on? What can you do in your immediate surroundings? Sometimes when you're entering into a courageous conversation, you might feel some discomfort because what you're entering may be different from what you're accustomed to. Learn to embrace and experience the discomfort. And regardless of what the discomfort is, always, always, always stay engaged. I revisit the statements because there are many parallel themes that I want to address this afternoon. A life worth living is one that is live for others. Service before self. To whom much is given, much is required. A life worth living is one that's lived for others. Service before self. To whom much is given, much is required. If you know of anything about Dr. Martin Luther King, you know these words are emblematic of his life. I also want to amplify the guidelines of courageous conversations as an organizational framework for today's address. So first, I'm going to start by speaking my truth. One of the people that guides some of the my work is Dr. Cornel West. He wrote a phenomenal book called Race Matters. If you haven't read that book, I encourage you to do so. This is a statement from Race Matters. Race is the most explosive issue in American life precisely because it forces us to confront the tragic facts of poverty and paranoia, despair and distrust. In short, a candid examination of race takes us to the core of American democracy. And the degree to which race matters in the plight and predicament of fellow citizens is a crucial measure of whether we can keep alive the best of this democratic experiment we call America. When I was asked to make this speech, I instantly thought about Dr. King's death and the reaction in my home when this occurred. I also thought about historical and nostalgic events that were precursors to Dr. King's death that made an indelible impression on the life of a young black boy growing up in the South. I was 8 at the time, and I remember my mother crying and my dad praying. My 5 older siblings were equally as grave, and I could not fathom what was affecting my usually stoic family. On this day, emotions took control, and my parents, like many of my community in Sumter, South Carolina, on April 4th, 1968, were grieving. The King was dead. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was shot and killed, and this moment was the emotional demise of a people, local and immediate. I grew up with Dr. King in my life. We sang the song about our modern-day saviors, coupled with our saviors from the past. Some of you might know this song. The song is by Dion, and it's about Abraham, Martin, and John. Has anybody here seen my old friend Martin? Can you tell me where he's gone? He freed a lot of people, but it seems the good they die young. You know, I just turn around and he's gone. My voice is not as beautiful as Dee, but I try. The picture of these three, I'll tell you a little bit about my home. The picture of these three, who were instrumental in the lives of black folk, were in profile on a stovepipe cover in my home. And some of you are saying, what's a stovepipe cover? I'm going to tell you. For those of you who might want to know, a stovepipe cover is an outlet from the chimney in which was connected a pot-bellied stove. Now some of you might want to know what a pot-bellied stove is. I'm not going to tell you that. This was, what happened is that we had a pot-bellied stove, and then we removed the stove, and we had to cover the gate where the stove was. And so you would put a stovepipe cover there, and on that cover was a relief of Abraham, Martin, and John. Although I digress in explaining a stovepipe cover, This was a symbol of black pride to have these three depicted close to the hearth, which was close to the heart of a Southern black family. Abraham who? Do you know? Abraham Lincoln. Martin who? Do you know? Martin Luther King. And John who? John F. Kennedy. Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King, and John F. Kennedy. I tell you about this memory to emphasize that my connection with Dr. King was visceral, local, and immediate to my family and community. The next part, experience the discomfort. After his death, Dr. King's death, my father felt defeated when it came to ending segregation in the South. Even though it was 1968, the South still had segregated schools. After passing the Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas in 1954, get this, 1954, which stated that schools were not separate but equal, I remained attending segregated schools until my middle school experience in 1974, which was 20 years after the law was passed. So there's something about having a law, there's another thing about policing a law. My sister, 14 years my senior, was a very big supporter of the nonviolence work of Dr. King. She attended South Carolina State College in Orangeburg, South Carolina. South Carolina State College was the historical black state college of South Carolina. Historical black colleges and universities were created to give black students an opportunity to attend college in the South because the state university, the University of South Carolina, did not allow blacks to attend. During the tumultuous 60s, my sister was a resistant marcher against segregation and attended an integration event at a whites-only bowling alley in Orangeburg, South Carolina. This event caused violent opposition by the whites at the alley. My sister and her college friends were pushed, shoved, and spat upon. Local highway patrolmen were brought in to keep the peace and arrested several of the black college students, but none of the white agitators. These unjust acts created additional protesting from the black students on campus, and as they argued for justice and the basic rights of attendance to local establishment. The Orangeburg Massacre was an incident on February 8, 1968, in which 9 South Carolina Highway Patrol officers in Orangeburg, South Carolina, fired into a crowd protesting local segregation at a bowling alley. 3 men were killed and 28 more were injured, hitting most of them in their backs. After the shooting stopped, 2 others were injured by police, and in the aftermath, one, a pregnant woman, later had a miscarriage due to the beating. Many of you may not know of this protest, but may have remembered similar slayings of white students at Kent State in Ohio and black students at Jackson State in Mississippi. Expect and accept non-closure. These early memories of historical events in the life of Dr. King shaped my consciousness towards civil rights. In the 1960s, Americans who knew only of the potential of equal protection of the laws expected the President, the Congress, and the courts to fulfill the promise of the 14th Amendment. In response, all 3 branches of the federal government, as well as the public at large, debated a fundamental constitutional question. Does the Constitution's prohibition of denying equal protections always ban the use of racial, ethnic, or gender criteria in an attempt to bring social justice and social benefits? To this end, in 1964, Congress passed Public Law 82-352, or the Civil Rights Act. The provisions of this Civil Rights Act forbade discrimination on the basis of sex as well as race in hiring, promoting, and firing. The term civil rights for this country may be an archaic term because as Americans, our basic rights of liberty, justice, and freedom are legislatively provided and legally protected for all races of people. And here in Iowa, we are progressively assuring that these rights for people regardless of affectional orientation. These secured rights are all cherished victories of Dr. King. But the work is continuous, and what was once focused on civil rights must now be an emphasis on social justice. As we move further into the 21st century, we must continue to strive for social justice and equality without repeating the mistakes of the past or revisiting those events that separate or divide. Therefore, we must stay engaged. One of my favorite sayings is that we must honor the past in order to launch the future. As the Dean of the College of Education, this saying is important to me because teacher education at UNI has a rich and wondrous history. If I am to make a difference in education, I must understand the context in which I live and work. In the context of the celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King, we can honor the past, launch the future, and stay engaged while honoring the critical importance of his teaching. At the King Center in Atlanta, Georgia, the programming focuses on the following principles of nonviolence that I know we can stay engaged in our own local and immediate context. So here are the 6 principles of nonviolence. The first is, nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. As you look at these principles, think about how you can reflect on and act on these principles of nonviolence. The next principle, nonviolence seeks to win friendship and understanding. You must know your enemy. You must know the person that you're in conflict with. You must seek his or her perspective before casting your own opinions. Number 3, nonviolence seeks to defeat injustice, not people. We focus on the injustice, not on the people. Number 4, and there are several sub-principles of number 4. Nonviolence holds that voluntary suffering can educate and transform. As you read through these subtenets of number 4, imagine, in order to stand up against resistance, that you can't be violent. You have to sit. You have to reflect. You have to think. But you can't act. You can't push back in order to make your point. Number 5, nonviolence chooses love instead of hate. And number 6, nonviolence believes that the universe is on the side of justice. The nonviolent resistor has deep faith that justice will eventually win. Therefore, we must stay engaged. To honor the past and to stay engaged, we can revisit the truths spoken by Dr. King as he wrote his second most seminal document, a letter from the Birmingham jail. Okay? Did I tell you I was a reading teacher? Okay, so a reading teacher asks people to read with them. So at this time, we're going to chorally read this. That means we're going to read it aloud together. Now, in order to read aloud together, you might have to first practice it. So I'm going to let you read it in your head first, and then we'll read it together. You can tell I was an elementary teacher too, right? Okay. So read it to yourselves first. Together. A spoken truth. Ready? I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider. Thank you. Let's give us a hand. Conclusion. As a former elementary teacher and junior high school history teacher, as well as a professor of children's literature, I would be remiss to my profession if I did not capitalize on this teachable moment. Therefore, I want to end my presentation with a reading from the book, Marching to Freedom by Elizabeth Partridge. This book captures the young people's movement in Selma, Alabama, and the historical march from Selma to the state capital of Montgomery. The excerpt I will read captures the event prior to the historic Selma-Montgomery March on March 21st, 1965. The first attempt to march to Montgomery took place on Sunday, March the 7th, 1965. This failed attempt was called Bloody Sunday. As I read the piece, and we then view the accompanying image compilation of the event to the tune of Abraham, Martin, and John, I want all of us to reflect on the legacy of Dr. King and to think about how our actions can affect the future. Bloody Sunday, March 7th, 1965. By noon on March 7th, hundreds were milling around Brown Chapel waiting for the march to start. Rumors flew that the troopers would use tear gas on them. Tear gas would not keep you from breathing, a doctor explained. You may feel like you can't breathe for a while. Tear gas will not make you permanently blind. It may blind you temporarily. Do not rub your eyes. Charles Maudlin reviewed protective moves with a group of kids and teenagers. Dodge any blows you could. If clubbed or kicked, curl into a tight ball and protect your stomach. If tear gas drops to the ground, if tear gas is thrown, drop to the ground to breathe, as the gas will slowly rise. Rachel practiced with the others. She put her nose to the ground to breathe over and over again with a growing sense of alarm. She couldn't stop thinking about the ways she could be hurt. Snipers could hide behind trees. Clark's posse on their huge horses with their clubs and cattle prods could chase them down. Bombs could be hidden in the church when they gathered or flung through the windows. Everyone was tense. Clark has put out a call for more deputies, and Governor Wallace had made it clear that he would stop the march. No doubt people would be jailed, some might even be injured. Dr. King was not there to reassure and inspire the marchers. Because of recent death threats, his advisors had talked him into staying away. He was in Atlanta preaching at the church he co-pastored with his father. The marches set off around 4 in the afternoon, led by freedom fighter Hosea Williams and John Lewis. In case of trouble, another freedom fighter, Andrew Young, stayed behind at Brown Chapel. The marchers walked 2 by 2 down Sullivan Street, turned right onto Walker Street, and headed for the bridge. No one sang or clapped. No one even talked. There was just the sound of their scuffling feet on the pavement. Miss Boynton and Charles were close behind William and Lewis. Not far behind them was Linda, Bobby, or Cheyenne. Linda wanted her sister beside her, but Joanne lingered at the church, then joined the line further back with friends. Rachel stood in front of Brown Chapel watching the marchers leave, too afraid to join. Everyone was quiet, solemn, and anxious. What lay ahead?
See my old friend
once again, I want you to pause and reflect and to think about the words of Dr. Martin Luther King and how you can embrace some of his actions so that you can affect the future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Watson, for joining us today here at Upper Iowa University for our Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day celebration. Your presence and words are greatly appreciated. In honor of Dr. Martin Luther King, one of my fellow classmates, Joe Alanis, will read a few excerpts from one of history's most memorable speeches, I Have a Dream. Dr. King gave this speech on August 28, 1963, from the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., in front of nearly 300,000 supporters of racial equality. Dr. King was assassinated April 4, 1968, but his words live on.
Thank you, Lord. Good afternoon. Try that again. Good afternoon. Today I'll be reading excerpts from I Have a Dream by Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., August 18, 1963. I'm happy to join with you today and will go down in history as the greatest demonstration of freedom in the history of our nation. 5 score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who have been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to the end of the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro is still not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the shackles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languishing in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. So I've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we have come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise to all men, yes, black men, as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promise of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. But there is something I must say to my people who stand in the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on a high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. They have came to realize that their freedom is inexorably bounded by our freedom. We cannot walk alone. It is not unmindful that some of you have come here of the great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from the areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. I say to you today, my friends, so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low, rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall be seen together. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with a new meaning, my country, 'tis of thee, sweet land, of liberty, of thee I sing, land where my father died, land where the pilgrim's pride, every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring from the marvelous hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. And when this happens, we will allow freedom to ring. When we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, free at last. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Next, Deirdre will sing Up to the Mountain.
I went up to the mountain because you asked me to. Up over the clouds to where the sky was blue. I could see all around me, everywhere. I can see all around me, everywhere. Sometimes I feel like I will never been nothing but tired, and I'll be working till the day I expire. Sometimes I lay down, Lord, no more I can do, but then I go on again, because you asked me to. Some days I'll look down, afraid I will fall, and then the sun shines, but I'll say nothing at all. But then I hear your sweet voice, oh, come and then go, come and then go. Lord, telling me softly, I love you so. Thank you.
Thank you again, Dee. In closing, I would personally like to thank you all for coming today and help us remember and honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. A preacher, true activist, a strong leader of the civil rights, a good man, and someone we'll always remember. We leave you with these words from Dr. King. The time is always right to do what is right. Now, I'd like to invite you all to join us for refreshments in Ballroom C. Thank you.